Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Um, my name is Alice Hom. I use she, they, them pronouns. I'm calling from the Sean Ohlone land, also known as Oakland. I'm an Asian body person, female body, gender nonconforming. I have short black hair, wear glasses. I'm in my living room. You can see in my background, I have the trans and BIPOC rainbow flag as a quilt. My fun panda poster up on top. I think I said I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. And welcome. Thank you for being here for this breakout session. Really excited for our panelists today. Let me see where I'm at. Our panel, the realities of recovery and reentry for the formerly incarcerated. It's focusing on economic opportunities and for incarcerated communities. We have three wonderful speakers today. I'd like to bring them in by having them introduce themselves. And if you could introduce yourself with your name, your pronouns, a physical description of yourself, the environment you're in, your title and organization, and the indigenous land that you're in. I'm going to start us off with Jamala Taylor.
Thank you so much. My name is Jamala Taylor. My pronouns are he, him, his. My physical description, I'm 6 feet tall, 215 pounds, brown skin, African-American male. At my stand-up computer desk in my living room, surrounded by, guess what, computers. And I work for IGP as a reentry coordinator, and I'm on the Ma'arenga Yam lands, also known as Apple Valley. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jamala. And IGP stands for Insight Garden Program too, because I know not everybody knows IGP. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to go with Amika.
Good afternoon. My name is Amika Mota. I am the policy director at the Young Women's Freedom Center and a co-founding member of the Sister Warriors Freedom Coalition. My pronouns are she, hers. I have long black hair. It is up in a big bun. I have glasses. I'm pretty itty bitty, can't tell on screen, but about 5'3", and in my home office surrounded by pictures of my loved ones and my favorite movement art. And I am joining you from Bay Miwok land, Concord.
Thank you. And Karen Lane.
Good afternoon, I guess now, or slightly good morning, afternoon. My name is Karen Lane. I'm a program director with the California Wellness Foundation. We're a statewide health foundation. I help lead the Leading for Power and Change portfolio at Cal Wellness. I am a Black woman with braids, black glasses, and a black shirt. You really can't see what's behind me right now because I have on a filter for my Zoom background. My preferred pronouns are her and she.
Thank you so much. And without any further ado, I want to just get into the conversation because we have, a sort of a tight hour with each other. To sort of give us context and for us to land, get us everyone on board, I'd like to ask Karen to give us an overview of the funding landscape for criminal justice work, and also hear some specifics from the California Wellness Foundation in terms of how your foundation has organized their priorities for incarcerated populations and criminal justice work. So go, take it away, Karen.
Yes, so by no means is this a comprehensive landscape, funding landscape, and I chose to spend more time talking more about themes, I think, than particular foundations, because I think foundations have different ways that they cut issues in the same way that the community does. But I think generally we can say that philanthropy as a field has increased support for criminal justice reform in the last decade. And this is really attributed to the persistence and consistent voices from the community, and really the commitment of community leaders to educate philanthropy on the injustice of our justice system, the driving factors behind mass incarceration, specifically race and power, and the lasting impact of mass incarceration on communities and families. I am a member, and the California Wellness Foundation is a member of the California Criminal Justice Funders Group. And this organization is an intentional space for peer learning among funders, and really is designed to increase the capacity of funders to partner with community in shaping grant making strategies at their individual institutions or in partnership with individual donors, and really has begun to serve as a space to sustain partnership between community and funders. And so members facilitate learning sessions with practitioners and community leaders, and have regular membership meetings. One thing that I'm really proud about, and I think is an example of the importance of having peer learning spaces where funders can engage with practitioners and community organizers in the field, and to sustain it, is the closing of DJJ. The California Criminal Justice Funders Group has been really committed to sustaining funders' attention and commitment to that work. This year, that the group has actually 4 practitioners and community leaders have graciously agreed to be movement advisors to that space. And so, again, raising issues around reentry, barriers to reentry, criminal justice policy, and other issues, really helping us ground that work and that learning with movement leaders. I also think the field has increased its understanding of intersectionality and the importance of building political power in communities most impacted by racism and the injustice of the criminal justice system. So giving an example from California Wellness, and there are other foundations who are doing this work well, but under Judy Belk's leadership at the California Wellness Foundation, we launched the Women's Initiative. And this initiative provided multi-year core operating support for women-led organizations to address the barriers to employment for women returning home from incarceration. And these organizations, A New Way of Life, A Time for Change, just to name 2 of them, really demonstrated the importance of having a comprehensive approach. Those organizations address the barriers to employment through direct services, including legal services, housing, support for women returning home around dependency court, family reunification, all of looking at the entire whole person when it comes to not just addressing employment, but looking at the factors that actually impact the whole being. And those organizations also utilize leadership development. So how do you actually get women to realize their own personal power, but also the importance of building collective power to win change, and integrated civic engagement. So these were very dynamic organizations that I think serve as a model of how we can actually achieve change. So I'm very proud of that initiative that Cal Wellness led. But across the field, there's also been increased investment in community organizing and integrated voter engagement. And so as a grant maker, I have had the privilege and opportunity to support organizations that are led by impacted leaders that focus on increasing civic participation, including but not limited to voting, because we recognize that there are barriers to voting for individuals with who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. And what has been powerful is seeing organizations led by formerly incarcerated individuals or system involved, have been system involved, really working to organize the political power of individuals with convictions and individuals returning home to educate and activate eligible voters in their community, but also to use their experiences and their voices to address not only the barriers to employment, but really to advance criminal justice policy reform, to use their collective voices to influence budget fights at the state and local level, and to really advance justice reinvestment campaigns. So I'll stop there because I don't want to overtalk, but I do think there's been movements in the field, but certainly would like to share, I think, places where we can continue to grow later in the discussion.
Thank you. And we're going to have a chance to hear more specifics from you on funder examples as well. Before we hear from our panelists and to speak more about their experiences with reentry, we want to show a video from the Insight Garden program, and we're going to set that up for you right now. This is a video that's in response to the pandemic and the early release of 8,000 people, IGP extended their work from the inside of 10 prisons to the community. This video shows their formerly incarcerated staff welcoming people home. So we're going to show this video now. Thank you for sharing that from Inside Garden program. And now I'm going to bring in Jamala Taylor, who is with IGP. Jamala, can you share more about your reentry experience and what you're doing to help formerly incarcerated people at IGP?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. That's my absolute favorite video. At the end of the day, it goes to exactly what we do. We help people. When you boil it all down, we help people. I'll give you a little background on IGP. Inside Garden program was founded in 2002 in San Quentin State Prison. We operate in 10 prisons and 13 yards across California, including the 3 women's prisons. We have a 48-week curriculum that's built around environmental education, permaculture gardening, inner gardening, and reentry prep. In addition to working for IGP, I'm also an alum of IGP, the In Prison program. I'm formerly incarcerated. I served 31 years in state prison, including 15 years in solitary confinement. I've been in freedom for almost 18 months, and I've been working with IGP for probably coming up on, well, we're right about at a year. So I think my journey kind of illuminates what we do at IGP perfectly. So I'll go a little bit into that. In 2015, I was released from long-term solitary confinement at Pelican Bay SHU to Lancaster State Prison to general population. And in getting there, I was, you know, there's a saying, if you don't use a thing, you lose it. And what I lost was the ability to socialize. Solitary confinement is exactly that, a cell with no window, incredibly limited sunlight, not a blade of grass, a tree, dirt, everything, and I mean everything, is concrete and metal. So when I got back to general population, of course, there were challenges adjusting to movement, to people, to conversation, to having people in proximity. I really couldn't tolerate that because I hadn't had it in such a long time. So I saw a sign-up list on board, and it was for a program called IGP. And after being surrounded by metal and concrete all those years, you know, it sounded good, touching some dirt, some mud, having no idea what IGP actually was. So I signed up, and a few weeks later, I began to go to the class, and it was every Friday for 2 hours, myself and 20 to 25 other men. And, you know, it turned into an oasis. It was a way of, you know, bringing or finding peace within the chaos that are maximum security prisons. It was It gave us the opportunity to step out of the prison norms, which is based on gangs and division and race and that kind of thing. And in that space for 2 hours, we could drop those things. We could talk to each other, we could share food, we could open up. And I needed that more than I even knew. And this was like the beginning of my journey to kind of re-socialize. And that kind of paved the way for me to do other work that I needed to do in regards to drugs and gangs and anger and violence and all of these things. So without the in-prison component of IGP, I don't believe I would have been able to do that work. And all of that together has a name, rehabilitation. This was the beginning of my personal transformation to being somebody who was a dangerous person before I went to prison. And I built on that when I got to prison with my relationship to gangs. And IGP kind of represented the beginning of that. And from that point on, they were in my corner, and they kind of guided me and ushered me through the board process. When I went to board the first time, I was denied in 2017. IGP remained by my side. I went again in 2020, a lot more prepared this time. IGP by my side. Unfortunately, fortunately, I was found suitable. Unfortunately, the governor refused to sign off on my release, so I had to go to another level of review. IGP at my side, and they ushered me. The governor eventually upheld my release, and I was released. The last month or so I was in prison, there was the pandemic, as you know, was at its height, raging at this time. So I actually got out with COVID. IGP, I was supposed to get a gate pickup and all of that, but of course I couldn't do that being COVID positive. So I went to a special transitional home, which was really like, you're free, but you can't leave and you can't have visitors until I was, I tested COVID negative. So again, I couldn't have visitors except for one, the reentry coordinator for IGP, who came to a house infected with COVID, filled with COVID dudes, and a bag of tacos. And we sat there in the driveway eating tacos, talking, and being acquainted and just kind of connecting. And this was like the beginning of my reentry journey. That was my first fast food in 31 years. And that the services that they provided, first and foremost, was mentorship, was friendship, was guidance. Everybody on the reentry team is formerly incarcerated. So they understood not just the headline things, but the things that happen within those gray zones that most people would never understand or would never see. So I was able to connect with them on that part of it. And from everything from system navigation to document acquisition to helping with employment. I mean, I had access to all of my needs. We have a Thursday night healing circle. I was able to access that, and that's support. Nothing more important than whatever form it comes in support, inside and out. And at the end of the day, that's what IGP did for me. And that's what we do, what they've allowed me to do for other people is support. We use gate pickups, a warm meal, the first warm meal, rapid response funding, emotional support, systems navigation, cell phone. For those people we connect with higher education, we give a laptop. And again, I can't say it enough, support, support, support. I won't dominate the conversation. We'll get into the rest of it as we go, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamala. And we are going to have time to hear from you again. So I appreciate you sharing your story. I'm now going to pass it on to Amika Mota. And can you tell us about your reentry experiences and what you're doing with the Young Women's Freedom Center?
Yes, absolutely. Just thank you so much for Jamala grounding us in the video and watching folks come home and in your own story. I think that this is the heart of what we're talking about today. So I'm going to dip into what our organizations do a little bit. So the Young Women's Freedom Center, we've been around for 27 years. We are a leadership and advocacy organization. We center the experience and ideas and analysis and the leadership of formerly and currently incarcerated people to lead system change. Not all of us are formerly incarcerated, but almost all of us are system impacted, and 100% of staff at the Young Women's Freedom Center has been impacted by poverty and gender-based violence. So we uplift leadership of the folks in the organization to end the criminalization of our people, the state-sanctioned violence of our criminal legal systems, and the harms of foster care, welfare, and other carceral networks that participate in the criminalization and control of our people. Our mission is to build a transformative movement that secures justice, opportunity, and self-determination for our people. We really deeply believe that the personal is political, and that finding the power in our own lived experiences is really key to the framework and methodology we use at the center. So I am going to, and also, sorry, before I move on to my own reentry story, I also want to bring up the Sister Warriors Freedom Coalition, which is a sister organization that we've launched recently that we consider to be the political arm of the organizations, and that we are going to kind of scale and lead the Freedom 2030 campaign that we launched in 2020. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my own reentry experience, and really because my story is the story of so many folks that have made their way through the center, and I think really demonstrates the way that we work with people. So I came home in 2015. I served 7 years in prison. I came home trying to figure out all of the basic reentry stuff, housing, employment, reunification. I had 3 children at the time and was trying to figure out how to get custody of my children back, but I needed to have those basics covered, right? Like the housing and the employment piece. So a good 6 months of struggling to try to get all of those things situated, bouncing around, unable to find employment. And I ended up meeting someone from the Young Women's Freedom Center about 6 months out. And that was a very much a turning point in my life. I was at the point of feeling frustrated and exhausted with not being able to get stable at that point. And so I stepped into the Young Women's Freedom Center, and I stepped into the center very much, you know, with not a whole lot of skills that I felt. I mean, I had a lot of skills, but I didn't understand at the time that they were transferable skills. I felt like I came in with a whole lot of, you know, just very little experience. I never imagined myself being an advocate. I had definitely never really engaged in policy. I'd never voted before in my life. And so what the center did for me was really allowed me the time and the space to really kind of be in a space that wasn't judgmental, wasn't punitive. I was able to practice the skills that I needed to learn. I was able to get familiar with different political contexts. I was able to shift the mentality of my own self as a person being bad and that it had, you know, someone that had committed harms, into understanding my life in the context of the world and the social, economic, political, historical, spiritual things that affected my whole life and the course of it and where I ended up. I was able to build relationships at the center. I was able to develop collective analysis with other folks that were doing the same thing I was, which was figuring out kind of who we were in the company of others that were like us. And yeah, so I had this really, really deep mentorship. And what I really, really had that is so important to the way that we move and into everybody that comes through the center was I had the time and the space that I needed. And I just really want to emphasize that leadership and strong leaders are not built overnight. It is really kind of a long-term trajectory. And so that was my reentry about 6.5 years ago. And you know, I kind of made my way through a few different positions there, kind of figuring out learning skills, figuring out where I could jump in. And about 2019, I was asked to be the policy director at the center. And we built the first policy department that we have had at the Young Women's Freedom Center. And so that was about year 4 of my reentry. And and I was the policy person, the one policy person. Since then, we have really been able to grow the team. We now have a team of 8. And that has happened in the last 3 years. We're running 10 bills this year. The full policy team is formally incarcerated or system impacted. And so my story, what the part that I want to emphasize more than anything, it's not even the incarceration piece. It's the 7-year piece since I've been home, right? And what it looks like to have been able to grow and heal and learn in the space where I was just fully accepted. And I had, the economic opportunity to stabilize. Like, I had a solid job this whole time through. I was able to get my children back. I was able to find housing. And so I just really want to talk about that. My own experience is similar to so many others, which is really this kind of long-term trajectory into leadership. So thank you so much. Excited to talk more about some of what we are doing at a later point in the session.
And thank you both to Amika and Jamala, sharing not only the personal and your transformation, but also bringing up the institutional and the structural, how all of those are tying into the healing, to the community, collective work, etc. Jamala, you brought this up earlier when you said you were leaving prison. It was right during the pandemic. So I'm curious to hear more from everybody about how have the last 2.5 years with the pandemic affected what you've been focused on, what your organization's been focused on. And Jamala, you sort of touched on it. Do you want to share a little bit more about what Insight Garden Program is facing these days with the pandemic? And you're on mute right now.
Yes. Over the course of the pandemic, I believe 52,000 people were infected with COVID, and inside the state prison system, their response to mitigate, and nobody really knew a lot about COVID or how to respond to it, but CDC fell back into the usual playbook. We'll mitigate by locking people down. So, a majority of that was spent not only under the threat of COVID, but locked in cells with very low access to yard or any kind of activities. And of course, it didn't work. It was rampant. I was in a building with 50 cells on the top tier, 50 on the bottom, 200 people. And there were periods when 4 cells were eligible to be open because everybody else was COVID positive. And I mean, it really just, and how could it not be? 4 phones, 6 showers between 200 men. It's pretty obvious what's happening. And there was an incredible level of anxiety because at the time, the only thing we really knew was what we were hearing off the news. And what was obvious was respiratory. If you get COVID, that's one thing. But if it starts messing with your breathing, there's a very good chance that this is going to be very, very bad. So we kind of lived, with that part of it, that fear, that anxiety. And in terms of IGP, I think our response to COVID, our development as an organization during the pandemic is probably the greatest testament to our organization overall. I mean, connectivity with our participants is essential. We build on that. The inside part of IGP, our program managers administer our curriculum, and they are the face of IGP, point of first contact. How many times do you get an opportunity to make a first impression? If they're terrible, that's the impression. If they're great, that's the impression. And on the reentry side, trust is imperative. When our participants are released from prison, there's already a trust. They're not being released to strangers. And that's buttressed by our reentry line. We have participants calling us from behind the walls, free of charge, whether they need a service or it's just to talk, just to vent, to air out, to build that relationship. And that's essential to the reentry piece. So CDC did basically lock everybody out. All of the organizations that had been coming in, all of the relationships that had been built kind of stopped on that day. And we couldn't abide by that, again, because the trust component is so important. So we took our in-person curriculum and transformed it to a correspondence curriculum. not having professional correspondence curriculum writers on staff or anybody with that kind of experience, but we did it. And from the outside looking in, that's impressive. From the inside, understanding how much it takes to track and store information and grade and mail in terms of resources and manpower is absolutely amazing. And again, what that did was kind of buttress that relationship. There was no, we didn't sever those ties and those bonds. And at the same time, we built up our reentry arm. Everybody on the reentry team is formally incarcerated. I think myself and one other guy probably served the longest. So a great deal of what we did was over the phone and gate pickups and being able to give folks that initial bag of cosmetics. And you know, we have the Thursday night meetings, cell phones, laptops, and yeah, this is how we responded to the emergency release of 8,000 people. I don't think anybody was ready for that. CDC wasn't ready to let 8,000 people go. The structures were not in place to receive 8,000 people, and we kind of built it as we went. And you know, if I do say so, we really did the damn thing. And yeah, I'm very proud of that transformation. I think we all are, because it was necessary. That infrastructure didn't exist, and we kind of created it as we went. A partnership between the reentry arm and the program. Very important.
Thank you for sharing that and giving us a sense of what was happening inside and when folks were released, what IGP was also doing. Amika, how about on your end? You mentioned, you know, 4 years, you've built up the policy team. How did the COVID-19 pandemic impact what you all were doing?
Yeah, really, really interesting time. We launched actually our Freedom 2030 campaign to end the criminalization of ourselves and our families on March 9th, 2020. It was 10 days before we entered lockdown that we had hundreds of women and gender expansive folks from across the state at the Capitol. And then as the world slowed down, we sped all the way up because the needs of our folks were great, and we needed to figure out how to respond. So we were focusing a lot of our energy on releases, getting our people home. A lot of what Jamala said, we were getting calls from the inside, really, really tough calls to hear, people being locked down, terrified, information streams were not accurate. And there was just a lot of kind of fear from the inside. So we did, we actually shifted into service mode, which is that's not our organization's mission, right? But we needed to respond with what was needed. And so we absolutely focused on releases, compassionate medical releases as we could, campaigns to release folks. And then we also pivoted to one of our biggest needs for the women that were coming home, which was housing. There was nowhere for folks to go, right? And there was all of these barriers, also some of which Jamala mentioned, but some programs that would typically accept women or gender expansive folks were not allowing anybody to enter during the pandemic. So we were able to mobilize, and really because we had a funder that trusted us to do what we needed to do, and gave us the unrestricted funding that we needed to launch a pilot housing program in San Francisco. And so we took over this small hotel, and we were able to provide housing for 45 folks for 90 days. That was kind of the minimum end, but it was about a 9-month total project. And everybody had everything they needed, cell phones, computers. They were able to stay separate because everybody had their own room and bathroom in this hotel. And so it was really kind of an interesting compilation of folks that utilized this housing. We had everywhere from, lifers that were paroling after 30 plus years, to young people being released from the halls, to folks that had been chronically homeless, but that needed a safe space to be. And so it was a really, really interesting time for us because it was something we had never done before. but we just kind of launched this program based on what we know how to do and how we know how to take care of our folks. And what we were really clear about not doing was not replicating any of the carceral institutions that folks were coming from. And so the whole hotel was really operated by staff that were also formerly incarcerated or system impacted. There is a real collective energy of the way that folks mobilized for each other, shared kind of duties to upkeep the space. And so that was one of the areas that we really shifted to during the pandemic. That was, kind of surprising for us, but it was actually something that is paving the way for work that we want to do in the future. The other thing that we were paying really close attention to during the pandemic is the economic exploitation of our folks on the inside, who were absolutely essential workers, but completely overlooked and undervalued, right? So a lot of our folks were having to respond to cleaning cells from folks that were COVID positive, right? With no PPE and no hand sanitizer and none of the things that we had access to. Meanwhile, the prison industrial complex was busy profiting off of us and our families. And so those were other things that really motivated us to really take some action in the policy realm, right? And so ACA 3, which is a ballot initiative, our first ballot initiative that we will run this year to remove involuntary servitude from the state constitution, was actually born out of Lancaster State Prison. And folks that came together and that, were fed up with the state of COVID and the way that folks were being, forced to labor on the inside. And so the original legislation was drafted in Lancaster State Prison, and, we kind of carried the torch out here when it was brought to us. We also really, a fight that we've been fighting for a while is folks' access to communications from the inside and how much folks have to pay for them. The pandemic absolutely highlighted how crucial these policies were, because visiting rooms were shut, right, for years, like 2 years. So the ability for folks to have access to communicate with their loved ones was so crucial in this moment, and actually a push that, it enlightened a lot of folks to actually what is possible. And so, we were able to take a lot of really kind of big steps, it felt like, in policy, and really in relation to the voices from the inside and what was needed and what was possible at the time. So I don't want to take up too much space, but yeah, thank you so much. And again, grateful to hear about your experience on the inside during that time as well, Jamal.
Thank you so much.
This is really helpful too. And I also just want to, if you all have questions for each other, feel free to chime in and bring other stuff up. That's perfectly fine. Karen, I want to pass it on to you. So it's not just about how the pandemic maybe shifted things for philanthropy or for your particular foundation, but also if you can give us a sense of any opportunities that came about that foundations took advantage of, or maybe there's opportunities now that you want funders to be thinking about. Frame it in that way too for us. Thank you.
Yeah, so just a couple of points. I hope these address, and I just also want to express gratitude to Jamala and Amika for just sharing your stories, and even in this moment of really practicing the art of like listening and hearing. I've just been so much informed and enriched by your courage to tell your story, and just learning just so much from both of you. So just really want to express gratitude. So I think during COVID, and again, I cannot speak for the entire field. I've actually only been in the field for about 5 years, but just want to share some observations from my own perspective. And I think this covers what you've asked me, Alice. So I think there were sweet spots, and I think there were some learning opportunities. I think there were some challenges and shortcomings. So, the pandemic, I think, helped philanthropy practice and realize we actually can get dollars out faster than we think, right? So there was, real effort, I think, on the part of philanthropy to have rapid response, and I think foundations and the field developed very quickly the mechanisms, realized that we actually have the mechanisms to get the dollars out quickly and in a way that's not as burdensome to communities to really meet the immediate need. I also think it was, again, an opportunity to see what community has always been saying, the power of flexible dollars. So just give, not restricted to certain programs, to certain head counts or whatever, just flexible core operating support dollars, use these dollars as you see fit. And it was also a test for trust-based philanthropy. Use these dollars as you see fit, because we trust that you know how to get the dollars to the right places that, and you know the solutions that are needed in your community. So I think there was some real learning across philanthropy. I also think organizations, and I hate listing organizations for any reason, because you're inevitably gonna forget somebody who's doing really great work. But I think foundations that have deep relationships with community, and I think everyone tries to do that, but I think organizations like that have been really partnering to support reentry efforts, criminal justice work, the California Endowment, Heising Simons, Lieber Foundation, East Bay Community Foundation, Rosenberg Foundation. I mean, there are foundations who have been really committed to be on this journey with community around criminal justice work. Those organizations, I think, were able to leverage relationship. And so one experience I wanted to share, at the time I was at the Weingart Foundation, but had a strong relationship with organizations that were doing reentry work, and we're learning some particularities of how COVID was impacting communities, reentry communities. So just the counties still requiring drug testing during the height of the pandemic, and people having to get on the bus to be drug tested, and that drug testing was a condition of their compliance with the children's court, right? And so how all those things were playing out. And so, you know, we were able to really structure grants to support community leaders that were trying to disrupt those practices. But the other thing that I think philanthropy could have, and some organizations, foundations did learn, there's always the power of the dollar and the grant, which is important. But how do you also leverage your strategic communications, your government relations capacity within your foundation to really amplify the messages that you're hearing from the community and hearing from the ground? And I think some foundations were able to do both during the pandemic, and I think that could be powerful. But I think the challenge right now is that we're talking about the pandemic as though it's over. So you're seeing less and less of those rapid response dollars hitting the ground in the same way that those dollars were moving in the beginning of the pandemic. And so what does this endemic thing look like, right? And what does community need in this moment, right? And I think we're entering this phase of recovery. And I think as funders, we have to really be informed by the community of what does the endemic look like and what does recovery look like, and really be committed. And I just appreciate the idea of time, both at the micro level, but also at the macro level, that this recovery period, we should really see it as a 10-year, 15-year period, right? For communities to really recover from the economic and social impact of this pandemic. Yeah, so I think I'll stop there without being long-winded.
Thank you. And you know, one thing that I've heard from all the speakers is about long term. It's not as if something can just change in, like, you know, 12 months, or that funders can say, hey, I'm going to support you for, you know, 18 months and then I'm going to go away. So I'm hearing a lot about long term. I'm hearing a lot about general operating. I'm curious, Jamala and Amika, what do you want to share to the funders that are on this breakout session about the challenges, the barriers, the successes for formerly incarcerated people? And maybe you could also speak to the impacts on different communities, BIPOC communities, LGBTQ folk, etc. You talked about women, men, etc. So I'm just curious about any information you might have about that. And yeah, go ahead, Jamala.
Yeah, I would go right to unrestricted funding. I mean, we're dealing with human beings. There are concepts like decarceration, public safety, and even abolition. Those things tie directly into what we do, both sides of what we do. And I'm on the reentry side, and reentry right now is sexy, and People know about it, heard about it, and it's interesting. But the thing that's not sexy are the things that take place behind the wall, sometimes in the shadows because they are behind the wall. And in that, I want to uplift our program staff, the people who create the connections with our participants. They need flexibility. They need to be funded. They need to be valued. And our funding doesn't always reflect that. At IGP, 84% of our funding is restricted, 79% tied to the government CDCR. And, that's not sustainable. I mentioned earlier about, how we pivoted during the pandemic from an in-person curriculum to a correspondence curriculum. So that really implies flexibility, but actually there wasn't a lot of flexibility because there were a lot of hoops to jump through, and they were willing to allow us to make those course corrections because they really needed us to make them because, they were releasing 8,000 people and they didn't know what to do with them. But now that the pandemic is kind of passing, maybe they don't think they need us so much. So the hoops and the regulations and the structure to grants are just becoming unsustainable and overwhelming. What we need are funders who accept and see and embrace the totality of our vision, not just the reentry side, but the program side. What we do on the inside, or what our people do on the inside, is create space for people to change. If we did not have that, if it was simply about picking people up at the gate, we would be little more than Uber or Lyft. We would pick you up, give you a bag of goodies, shake your hand, and wish you well. That's not us. Our participants need and demand more than that. And when I mention things like decarceration and public safety and abolition, this is how you do it. It often happens in small pods, one life, one group, one prison at a time. And I honestly feel like we are changing the world. We're creating space for people to, one, change in prison, to, one, actually rehabilitate themselves, which goes to public safety. That's pretty important. Everybody should be invested in that. Decarceration. If we get people to actually transform in prison and change their lives and re-enter society in a way that gives them a great chance to succeed and not reoffend, prisons close. The numbers come down eventually. Prisons aren't closing anytime soon. That's for certain. This is a long-term thing. And, a good deal of that goes to, our people on the inside who do create that space for true, sincere rehabilitation. And we're just hopeful that we could get funders to kind of, embrace all of us and acknowledge that maybe we have that grassroots expertise. So, and I'm not saying we should like fall back on accountability and transparency. Those things are important too, and those systems should be in place. But in terms of where the rubber meets the road, in terms of actually allocating the resources and having the flexibility that you need dealing with human beings to quickly course correct and operate in the gray zones, the places that you're not going to see on a list, on a to-do list, the places that just exist individually within each human being. We need that flexibility. We need funders to see that part of it and be kind of open to that, to embracing all of us, the whole of us.
Thank you very much for sharing the wholeness, the totality of everything that we need to be funding and thinking about. Amika, how about on your end?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would start by saying, leadership development and opportunity to build on transferable skills, which is this kind of long-term period that I just described. And when talking about my own story, there are, 36,000 women that came before me and many more to come in the door that need the same time and space to develop their skills. And a lot of these skills are kind of overlooked in professional or mainstream training environments. And so recognizing the power of the way that impacted led organizations move as a value that we just kind of can't even, I don't know, we can't put a number on that. So well-paid and stable jobs is also really key to the way that we're able to move, is once our people are stable and not in crisis, so many doors can open and people can take a breath and kind of figure out what's next. And, you know, these are leaders of the movement. These are kind of this is the next generation that will be coming up under us. And so creating that space is really crucial. But I also just want to say that so much has become clear to us about like what we need to achieve Freedom 2030. And a lot of what we learned in the pandemic as well, right? So we actually need to build out these multi-entity agencies. We are working currently on, we've launched a C4, we've launched another C3. We will be launching a PAC this year. We are doing our first ballot initiative, the Sister Warriors Freedom Coalition this year, and we're stepping into housing. And that was really out of this kind of test run that we got to experience during the pandemic and how successful it was. And so we just know we need to be in many places. And so we're going to ask for what we need. And, you know, Jamala, you also kind of referenced these unsustainable funding streams, right? And so we are absolutely in that mindset as well, as we really need to start thinking about other ways to move and ways that our own communities can build wealth and capital investment. And we really, you know, we need a lot of money to actually achieve what we want to see in Freedom 2030. And so I just can also say on this end a little bit is that we're going to shrink a little bit less and be a little more bold to really say, this is actually what we need over 10 years. Like you mentioned, Karen, right? It's not necessarily in a 1 or 3 year cycle. This is actually what we need for 10 years, right? And so that's just very much the mind frame we're in right now, is really kind of thinking about ways that we can really translate this to funders and have the kind of trust and investment to get this long-term work done.
Thank you very much. And I'm inspired by all that you have shared. I'm grateful for what you are sharing right now. I think it needs to be heard. And I want to open up right now for questions from our audience. And since we're, an intimate group, I'm wondering, there was one person who wrote something in the chat box. I'm wondering, Tony, do you want to come off mute and ask your question instead of me reading it out loud? Are you okay with that, Tony?
Sure, yeah, that's fine. Hello.
Thank you.
I'm just curious because we're funding a lot of services for formerly incarcerated folks, and what do folks need day one coming out of being incarcerated to really just, I guess, smooth the path to reentry, and what services can be there just in that first period that you found really critical?
And Tony, could you just tell us where, what organization you're with, what foundation you're with?
Sure. I work for the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, and we're doing the community reinvestment grants and as well as cannabis equity funding.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Answering that question, in addition to the hug at the gate, that's always a good start. Technology and document acquisition. It would be great. I've been on calls recently with Department of Corrections in other states, and it's really shocking to hear how far ahead of California other states are. In particular, states like Louisiana and Kentucky. They have DMV people on site at the prison. When somebody is released, they get out with their driver's license or their state ID, social security card, and birth certificate. In California, that's not the case. So the first 2 months we spend trying to help people who in a lot of cases don't understand technology. When I first got out, I couldn't operate a cell phone. When I went to prison, beepers and rotary phones ruled the day. I get out and there's laptops and all of this other stuff that are a little more than paperweights. I had no idea. And in the world we live in today, if you can't navigate technology, you will never be fully integrated. So that's something that has to start from day one. And quite frankly, we as a society have to do better, kind of locking on and teaching people basic technology skills. That's necessary even before they get to the job, just being able to access services and acquiring those documents. As we all know, in California prison, especially if you've been in for a long time, they kind of mandate you to go to transitional housing. So that's your first 6 months out. And say in my situation, that's 6 months where you live free. That's an excellent time to save money. But the first 2 months, you're chasing your tail trying to get your documents in order so that you can get a job. If we could do that inside of prisons, people could come out with a running start. So when their 6 months is up, they're not being turned out to potential homelessness. They're being, turned into an apartment, and they're building and building and building, stacking on top of their rehabilitative successes.
And I almost second that hug, because that's a big one. Also, I was just on the phone with someone yesterday who is coming out of long-term incarceration. She's actually transferred to ICE in Georgia and is working her way to come home from there, hopefully soon. But, one of the things that she was saying was she was just talking about how terrified she was, right? And there's so much of that truth for folks that are coming home. There's so much to be excited about and so grateful to be able to walk out those doors. And it's also super intimidating. And there's a lot of fear around it because we are stepping into this world that we just don't know anymore, right? And maybe doesn't know us. And I was able to come home to my family. And so I had some teenagers that were able to show me the phone thing, right? But that's also really a big thing is, I see a lot of our folks that have been out a year that are still struggling, right? And that it was actually something we just didn't even identify. Even as formerly incarcerated people, sometimes, we could be side by side with folks and not realize how much they're actually struggling with some of these technology things. So again, we're really paying close attention to folks now. We've had, but also just to say safe housing and not just housing, right? But particularly for folks being released from women's facilities, trans folks, women, and gender expansive folks. Housing is tricky, right? And really feeling okay and safe in a space is difficult. So we are absolutely, I think, day one, that is one of the most crucial things, is being in a space where people feel relative safety, right? And yeah, that was kind of some of the things I could think of, but I also, just having somebody there that knows what it's like. That was the response that we could give to Sis yesterday when we were talking to her, is like, you are coming home to so many others that know what it's like on day one, right? And we will be with you, we will be alongside you, and all of that fear, you have people to navigate it with you, right? And so that is priceless as well, like folks that have done it before and that really can recognize like what other folks are going through and what needs are that may not be expressed. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Or comments? It's not even just a question. If you want to comment about how these experiences and stories are landing for you.
I can jump in. My name is Iris Garcia. I'm at Katali Foundation, and I get to be a member of California Criminal Justice Funders Group with Karen, just really sitting with that concept of creating belonging after so much isolation and dehumanization, just how beautiful that is, and how I can hear the emotion in your voices when you speak about that. So I did have a question, and I'm reflecting on what you're sharing. So I had asked kind of this idea of, and you had spoken a little bit of what you want funders to be educated on. When I hear you describe this work, it's in this holistic way, and so many funders are like, well, we fund organizing and base billion, period. We fund policy work, period. We don't do, if we do that, we don't do direct service, or if we do direct service, we don't do organizing and policy. And what you all are saying is that it's not siloed like that. That's not how you approach the work, particularly with this population, right? And then I also am hearing this idea of you know, we have abolition funders that won't touch anything inside, right? Because it feels like you're substantiating the like continuation of prisons. But then you have reformist folks that are like not on board with decarceration because they believe that, you know, the system has to continue to exist. So I guess there's just, if there's any advice of, you know, for funders that are working, want to work together, and de-silo and honor the complexities of the strategies that you all are bringing to this work, what advice would you have for us?
For me, I just really come from a boots on the ground approach that I think is just basically at the end of the day, you can't have abolition if you have people in prison. What we do is create space for people to rehabilitate and ultimately get out of prison. That's how you achieve abolition. That's how you get rid of the prisons, gradually reduce the numbers. In terms of prisons just going away, you know, tomorrow, I think we all know that that's not going to happen. So you're not funding prisons, you're funding people coming home. You're funding programs of people in prison. So, and it's like, I do understand where people think, well, you know, if that's an in-prison program, CDC should be funding that. And you know what? You're right. They absolutely should. But they don't see it that way. And it still has to be done. Who's going to do it? They have an interest in people like myself being in prison. At the end of the day, if we don't do it, it won't get done. And prisons aren't going anywhere.
Thanks so much, Iris, for naming the holistic piece, because it is. I actually feel like what is also running through all of this conversation to me is, I don't know that we've explicitly named, or I have at least, the healing, right? The aspect of healing, and that being central to all of the work that we're doing, like programming, services, policy. None of that means anything if we aren't doing the work that our folks need to do when they come home from these systems, and a whole lot of trauma, like, you know, so that's incorporated in everything that we do. And I hear that in, maybe you didn't name it either, Jamal, but in this sitting in circles together, breaking bread together, being in space together, those are all ways that we heal together collectively. And we need that space. And the other thing I wanted to say too is I do remember the first time I stepped into like a circle of folks talking about abolition. It was really shortly after I stepped into the Young Women's Freedom Center. I don't think I actually knew what abolition was at that point, but it felt so distant from me because I had just left a facility where there was no running water. People could not shower or drink the water at CIW because the water system was so bad, right? And so it was a lot of bridging to get to a point of understanding abolition in a way that was digestible, right? For people that are coming from an environment of such scarcity, and with these reforms, and I understand the idea of not wanting to reform these systems, and these small incremental reforms along the way have such an impact on the way our folks experience systems day to day. And so I just really want to name that, as I don't think I could ever land on one side or another. I know that to be true for a lot of folks, but it's very much work we need to be doing in parallel tracks, because it makes a really big difference for folks. I also wanted to say, I did see a question in the chat about the percentage of folks that end up in the system multiple times. So recidivism, I don't know if anyone else has the recidivism data, but shrinking that number through programs, or ideas about shrinking that. And so I just want to say too, that the programs that we do have available to us, are the beginning of really transformative pieces of our lives inside. But the other thing I want to say that is the only thing that has like really, really clear data on reducing recidivism is our ability to stay connected to our loved ones. And creating that access is so crucial to folks staying connected and to having a positive reentry and to staying connected and united with people that are outside the walls. I just really want to emphasize that as like one of these really key things that we may not think about all the time, but actually has some really, really strong data, even more so than programs, right? Is the staying connected with loved ones. Yeah.
From the programming piece, I think that has a direct impact on recidivism on the outside, but also what's going on behind the walls in prison. When I first went to prison, it wasn't called CDCR. It was just CDC, California Department of Corrections. They didn't believe in rehabilitation. They didn't act like they believed in rehabilitation. It was lock them up, throw away the key, open the doors, they kill each other, we lock them up again. And we did our part. The prison was every day there was people being shot and stabbed, murder and mayhem. That was maximum security prisons. Since that time, since maybe the last 10, 15 years, when they've started introducing rehabilitative programming inside prisons and letting outside organizations in. Again, when I first came to prison, you never saw free people. You never saw organizations. That was not part of the landscape of maximum security prison. Prison has done a 360-degree turn. You very rarely hear about loss of life, gunshots from guards, pretty much non-existent. Stabbings way down. Violence is just, I'm not gonna say it's non-existent. It's a artificial environment. Of course, you're gonna have that, but nowhere near like it was. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. Rehabilitative programming, what we do, bringing our expertise in various other organizations inside and outside of prisons, impact how people behave. People have hope now. They see an end to it. It's not just you're locked up for the rest of your life. I went at 18 years old and that was my reality. I have life. I'm going to be here. California didn't let people go. They didn't believe in rehabilitation. So this is what it was. And I behaved accordingly. That paradigm has shifted because of organizations like ours. And the same with recidivism. I don't have exact numbers for our organization, but it's as close to zero as you can get in regards to IGP. What we do absolutely works. Very few instances of people going back, and usually when they have is something minor where they get right back out. Nothing serious to my knowledge.
Thank you for sharing and for bringing in that question that was in the chat. I'm recognizing we have 3 more minutes, and in our final time with each other, I just want to say, like, I'm hearing holistic, I hear general funding, I hear healing. I'm wondering if each panelist just wants to go through and share one final comment that you would like funders to think about and to take action on. And I'm going to pass it to you, Karen.
I really want to save as much time for the other panelists. I just would like to invite everyone on the call to join and attend a learning session with the California Criminal Justice Funder Group. You can find more information. We've really been supported by NCG with technical support. There's information on their website, even listings of our sessions. So please join. We always again, it's a peer learning space. It's a safe space for funders. We're really trying to target, we do co-programming with movement leaders. And we are also, mindful that we also have to change our boards and trustees. And so we're hopeful to do that kind of education and work this year too. So just want to send that invitation.
I just put the link in the chat box. So to find out more, Amiko, for you, a final,
Yeah, just huge shout out to everyone that came through today. And I dropped in, I think the link earlier may have been incorrect for the Young Women's Freedom Center. I'll also drop in Sister Warriors, but yeah, one thing I didn't bring up was the Freedom Charter that was drafted by over 300 formerly incarcerated and system impacted folks over the last few years. So come through, take a look at the Freedom Charter, sign on as an ally member, and really just, those are ways to kind of keep up on what we're doing, the ways that we're moving and the campaigns that we're focusing on. Yeah, and just really appreciate everyone's time and space here today. Thank you.
For me, security versus insecurity. operating, doing the work that we do and operating in an insecure environment. And I'm speaking directly to funding, not knowing where the next round of funding is coming from. It's not fun. Doing the work is hard, it's demanding, and it would be great if we could do it up against the backdrop of security, knowing that we're going to be able to be there and provide services for our people. And at the same time, not lose our own jobs, our own livelihood, because funding is not available or there's so many restrictions. So, I would just really implore funders to, take a look at the work on the grassroots level and, fund our mission as opposed to, placing the various restrictions. Just look at what we do and what we're capable of and how much more we could do. And yeah, we welcome you. Thank you so much. Thank everybody for having me, and thank my fellow panelists for being here.
Thank you. And we're coming to the end. So I just want to really thank again Jamala Taylor from Insight Garden Program, Amika Mota from Young Women's Freedom Center, Karen Lane from the California Wellness Foundation. I also want to give a shout out to Sarah Evers for helping with the background, Iris Garcia and Amanda Berger for helping us put this thing together. And really thank you to the audience for coming. So if you want to just kind of come off video, just so people can say, see you and say hello. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming to NCG's breakout session. And we hope to see you tomorrow for day 2. Thank you again. Thank you.